So I think I am going to start. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today to learn about winter sowing. My presentation is going to focus a little bit on winter sowing vegetables. And I hope that I can teach you a little bit about this wonderful way to grow your own food. So I'm just going to share my screen with you and I'll get started. I hope everybody can see my screen up top. And I just, so today, thank you so much again for joining me to learn about this wonderful way of growing your own food. Today, I will talk about winter sowing vegetables. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about who coined the term winter sowing and a little bit about when that happened. I'm going to describe the benefits of winter sowing. And I'm also going to give you a step-by-step guide to winter sowing so you can hopefully start this process on your own, in your own backyard or in your own piece of land that you might have, or even on your balcony. And then I'm also going to give you some suggestions of what vegetables to plant for winter sowing. So winter sowing is a fairly sort of new term, and over the past 15 years, it has gained a lot of popularity. It was coined by a gardener from New York. Her name is Trudy Davidoff, and she discovered that by using plastic containers, they act as mini greenhouses when they are warmed up in the sunshine. They produce condensation and they help seeds germinate in the winter. So what happens is that the seeds are chilled over the winter in these plastic containers, and then they sprout and they germinate just at the right time when the conditions are right and the temperatures are waking them up. When I first learned about winter sowing, I was very confused because I learned that in order for seeds to germinate, they need constant moisture and warmth and light. And so for me, it was a very mysterious kind of thing. How can seeds germinate in jugs in the middle of winter covered in snow? But it works, and it's really quite amazing. So some seeds do need that constant light and the constant moisture in order to germinate, but some seeds don't, and they actually need what's called a cold, moist stratification period. And this process subjects the seeds to both cold and moist conditions, and then the temperatures fluctuate. So you get maybe a little bit of cold, and then you get a thaw, and then you get a freezing cold again. And these conditions are what the seeds need in order to trigger that germination. We call it winter sowing, but we are not putting the seeds in the ground like you would think about in typical sowing. You're actually putting them in plastic containers. So, and then you're putting them outdoors, and containers are clear. They're closed, but they are ventilated. And what happens is the seeds experience these winter conditions and they remain dormant while they are chilling. And then as spring approaches and the light increases and the temperatures get warmer, germination is triggered and your seeds start to sprout. In winter sowing, a lot of the common things that people usually winter sow, some trees and some shrubs are very common. Perennials, native perennials, as Rick will discuss, are very common for winter sowing. And also vegetables actually work for winter sowing as well. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the benefits of winter sowing. So one of the first benefits of this kind of gardening is that it is very easy. You don't have to have any expensive equipment. You can probably even use things that are lying around your house right now today. And you can start this process without any fancy equipment, which I think is one of the things that attracts many people to this method of gardening, is that you don't need fancy grow lights and you don't need a lot of indoor space in order to start growing your vegetables. Winter sowing is efficient. As I mentioned, you don't need to use a lot of expensive equipment and you don't need to run grow lights for weeks at a time. It saves space indoors for maybe some of those really, the plants that really need that moisture and the warmth for growing and germination success. One of the other benefits of growing your vegetables in using the winter sowing method is that there's no hardening off. For those of you who might not be familiar with this term, hardening off is when you have your seedlings grown indoors under grow lights, and then just about a week or two before you plant your seeds outside for the season, you need to gradually increase their exposure to the outdoor conditions. And this is what hardening off is. When you winter sow your vegetables, your plants are already acclimatized to the cold conditions. And so you don't actually need to harden them off. You can just plant them from the jug straight into the garden bed for their home for the season. The jugs also help to prevent the seeds from being washed away by rain and wind. And it also helps the seeds to be protected by predators such as birds and squirrels. And so it helps to really sort of protect your seeds. Your jugs there's two functions. It helps to protect your seeds, and then it also acts as a greenhouse when the temperatures start to increase. And the biggest benefit for me is on these dark, long, dreary winter days, it gives me a chance to get my hands dirty in some soil. So for me, one of the benefits of winter sowing at this time of year is that it's like a garden therapy. And I find that it really helps to make me really look forward to the season ahead. So I'm going to just go through the step-by-step process, the common process, and how I started winter sowing vegetables. I will give you some resources at the end of my presentation, and people use many different methods for winter sowing, but this is the method that I use and how I got started. So I started winter sowing vegetables about 5 or 6 years ago, and this is sort of the method that I used and I found to be very successful. The very first thing you want to do is choose your containers. People usually start collecting clear plastic containers a few months before their winter sowing starts. And it's a great way to use those plastic containers that you might have from milk or from juice or water even, and you can recycle them. So it's a great way to keep those plastic containers out of landfill. So the shape and the size of your container, it doesn't really matter, except that it needs to be made of transparent or translucent clear plastic, a white plastic, and it needs to be deep enough that you can put about 4 inches of soil in the bottom, and it needs to be tall enough that the plants will have room to grow after they germinate. If you can, when you're choosing your containers, try and avoid, I have an example of try and avoid the green colored containers that some pops come in, or soda pop, because this color doesn't let enough of the light come into your plant. So I've tried using green plastic containers and it has never worked for me. So I would recommend sticking with the clear plastic or the translucent plastic containers. After you've chosen your container, the next thing to do is to prepare and prep your container. So obviously it needs to be clean and it needs to be free from any other thing that housed it before your winter sowing project. So with warm soapy water, just make sure that your container is clean and that it is rinsed thoroughly and that it is also dry. After you've cleaned your container, you want to poke holes, drainage holes in the bottom of your container. And there's a couple of different ways to do this. So I use a drill, makes me feel powerful, but I use a drill to put my holes in the bottoms of my containers. But some people use other methods. You can heat an old knife with a sharp point and heat it up with a lighter or something warm. And then you can melt the plastic container to create your holes in the bottom. I was talking to somebody not too long ago who mentioned that she uses the incense sticks and she lets those burn and then she just will melt the hole in the bottom of her container. I thought that was quite an interesting method to make her holes. After you poke your holes in the bottom, you're going to need to cut your container. And this allows you to put your soil in as well as sow your seeds. So you start, the best way to start is with an X-Acto knife or a really sharp utility knife. And you want to put a slit about, again, 4 inches from the bottom of your container. And then with very sharp scissors, cut around the edge of your container, but leave a hinge. And this acts, this is your lid essentially. And then after you've made your slit and you have your holes, then you want to take the cap off. So if you're using any kind of container, like a juice container that had a lid, you want to leave that off. And this is the way that the rain and the snow will enter your container to keep your soil and your seeds moist for germination. After you've prepped your container, the next thing to do is to add the soil to the container. It's a really good idea to use a sterile potting mix. There is some debate or conversation around what kind of soil to use with winter sowing vegetables. And I've tried a couple of different methods. I find in my experience that using potting mix is actually more successful than using like a seed starting mix. So I think it just depends. Play around with it and see what works for you if you happen to have both. But I think the nutritional value in the potting mix actually helps to give nutrition to your seedlings once they start to grow. You always want to make sure that your soil has is about 3 or 4 inches deep in your container. This allows enough room for your roots to grow. And you want to make sure you moisten your soil before you add it to your jugs. One of the tests that I do is after you wet your soil, take a big handful of your soil and squeeze it. If you want to make sure that there's no water dripping from your hand, because this now tells you that your soil is saturated. So put a little bit more dry soil in and squeeze it again. What you want to do is make sure that it forms a ball after you open your hand. And this tells you that the soil is moist enough in order to be added to your container. When you're adding soil, make sure you fill it right to the brim, because as water and snow enters your container, there will be some compression. So you want to make sure you add your soil to the very top edge of your container. The next step is sowing your seeds. So in order to sow your seeds correctly, pay attention to the packet and follow the directions for the optimal depth. I've learned through experience that smaller seeds sometimes need light in order to germinate, so that they can be planted with very minimal soil on top. But larger seeds can be planted a little bit deeper, but do pay attention to the information on your seed packet. And if that information is not available, just Google that information, and you should be able to find something online that tells you how deep to plant your seeds. In terms of how many seeds to sow in a container, this is one of the most common questions with winter sowing vegetables. It sort of depends on your size of container. If you have a bigger container, then you can sow more seeds. A smaller container, sow fewer seeds. And I sort of go by a rule of thumb that in my containers, I plant enough seeds that even if 50% of my seeds don't germinate, then hopefully I will get one to three seedlings per jug. Again, depending on the size of your container. And then if all of your seeds germinate and you are overflowing with seedlings in your jug, then you can easily, before the transplanting happens, you can easily just thin out those seedlings like you would do if you were growing your seeds inside as well. So you just very, very carefully open up your jug and just remove the ones that are not the strongest of your plants to give your stronger plants more room to grow. The best types of seeds to use when you're winter sowing are cold hardy annuals, herbs and cold crop vegetables, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail there, and then also perennials that are native to your zone. And following my presentation, Rick is going to teach us all about winter sowing perennial native flowers. Make sure, the other thing to remember is make sure that you only plant one vegetable per container. It's sometimes very confusing if you plant tomatoes and onions all in the same container. So make sure you only plant one vegetable per container. So I'm giving you a little bit of an idea for some of good vegetables to start with winter sowing. So some of the ideas here are any vegetables from the brassica family. So cabbages, bok choy, broccoli, rutabaga, turnip, anything like that would do well with winter sowing. Some of the lettuces are really great with winter sowing. I've had great success with black seeded lettuce, mixed salad greens, and also arugula is a very, very great winter sowing greens. Root vegetables, beets, carrots, and radishes do really well with winter sowing, as well as some herbs like dill, oregano, summer savory, mint, cilantro, parsley. And then some of the other ones I have here are also spinach and Swiss chard do really well with winter sowing. Leeks, anything from the allium family, onions, chives. I think I mentioned bok choy earlier. And then I've also had success growing lavender in winter sowing. So, but the most important thing is also just to make sure you're growing what you like to eat. That's sort of been my rule of thumb, but if you like to try anything new, then these are some great vegetables and herbs to start with. So after your container is prepared and you've sowed your seeds, the next step to do is seal your container. And again, there is a lot of sort of conversation around what is best to use with sealing your container. In my experience, I found that using a very, very sticky tape works the best. Your container is going to be outside, exposed to the elements like rain and snow, and you don't want the container to open. So a strong duct tape or a Gorilla Tape is probably the best option to use for sealing your container. Something like a packing tape that isn't as sticky might not work as well. So you want to wrap the duct tape around your container to seal that cut, the slit that you made a little earlier. After you've sealed your container, the next thing to do is you want to label your container. And it is best to write maybe in a couple of different places what is planted inside the container. So you want to use, people often use a grease pencil or a waterproof permanent marker to mark their containers. And you want to write the name of the vegetable that you have planted, as well as the date that you've put the container outside. It can't hurt to record this information in a garden journal. because this also allows you to keep track of successes and make improvements for the following year. And it's also good just in case you can't really, or that somehow the label comes off in the middle of the winter, then you know exactly what's planted in the container. I know that for some people who have lots and lots of different containers, they use a numbering system. But if you're just starting out, you're going to use a few different vegetables, that's not necessary, but definitely put the name of the plant on the container and the date that you put it outside. And then after everything is labeled, it's time to put your containers outside. It is a good idea and to wait until about January or February to start your winter sowing when the temperatures have dropped. And then depending on the type of vegetable you want to winter sow, it's recommended to maybe stagger the planting. So the really cold, hardy vegetable seeds can handle the coldest temperatures of the season, while the more tender vegetables need a warmer temperature to benefit from the greenhouse that you've created with your container. So this is, again, just sort of a rough idea. You want to start your kale and spinach and broccoli in January and February. Bok choy, your root vegetables like your beets and your carrots, maybe in March. So coming up in the next week or two. And then April is when you want to maybe winter sow your much more tender vegetables like your tomatoes and your peppers. The precipitation that happens over winter, the rain and the snow, it should help, should keep your soil and seeds moist enough. But it can't hurt to check on your containers every once in a while to make sure your seeds are not dry. If they are, just get a little spray bottle and spritz them to make sure that your soil is continuing to stay moist. This will help when the temperatures get warmer. The moistness inside the container creates the condensation and creates your mini greenhouse. So you want to make sure that everything inside the container is moist. And then put your containers in a sunny area. Again, when the sun hits that container, it will start to warm it up and create your mini greenhouse. And make sure that where you put your container, there is no standing water because the seeds in the soil will rot if there's not proper drainage. Around early spring, maybe March or April, beginning of May, you will start to see the seeds germinating. And this is a really exciting time for people who winter sow. You'll see tiny little green sprouts coming, and you'll be able to start to look for the rate of growth of your plants. It's a very exciting time. But if you, when it's time to transplant your seedlings, it's a good idea to wait maybe until, in our zone, maybe in the Halton region, wait until the end of May. I don't usually transplant my winter sowing vegetables until the May 2-4 weekend at the earliest. And this makes sure that your vegetables are strong enough, your seedlings are strong enough, and it also makes sure that the soil that you're planting them into is warm enough to help the roots continue to grow. It would be so sad if the roots just got sort of frozen if the ground was not warm enough. So wait until the end of May before you transplant your winter sowing vegetables into their vegetable bed. Before you transplant, you want to water your seedlings. And this makes it easier for the plants to be removed from the container. And then also you want to water your garden bed, as this reduces transplant shock. The seedlings are going from one moist environment into another. Open up your container and then gently separate your seedlings into the number of plants that you want to grow. When you're transplanting your vegetables, remember to think about the size that they will be when they reach their mature height, and make sure you give them enough space in your vegetable bed. And this also helps to increase air circulation as well. I have here just a few resources as I wrap up my presentation. So one of the really wonderful groups that I belong to is it's Winter Sowing. It's a Facebook group and it's specific to vegetable gardening with Cheryl Mann. It's a very active group and lots of great discussions, tips and tricks on how to do winter sowing vegetables. She is located in, I think it's zone 9. So she's located in Southern California, but there's people from all over North America and the world who are talking about winter sowing in different climates and giving really great tips and ideas. If you're looking to maybe just do some reading on some websites, the Empress of Dirt .net has a great some information about winter sowing, and then also the website The Spruce has some great information as well. And if you're looking for some videos to watch the process of what I just sort of explained, or look for some different ideas, if you just search winter sowing in YouTube, there is a plethora of different videos that people have recorded in order to help people understand winter sowing and hopefully helping people to become successful with this way of gardening. So I want to just thank you very much for your attention this afternoon. And I hope you learned something new about this exciting way to grow vegetables outdoors. And the best thing that if you've never tried this before, give it a try and experiment and have fun. And I hope that you will enjoy the process. It's a very exciting thing to do, and it's wonderful to garden in the middle of winter. And if you have any questions or you would like to discuss winter sowing vegetables any further, please feel free to send me an email. My email is kirsten.mccarthy@gmail.com. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Kirsten. That was amazing. We do have a couple of questions. Somebody's asking, if we don't have enough plastic containers, can we use aluminum roasting pans?
Yes, I think this method would also work as well. You would just need to obviously make sure that the top has a clear dome. And you can also poke holes in that clear dome as well. And just make sure the depth of the roasting pan, it's about 4 inches. This gives the roots enough space to grow.
And there's a follow-up question. If there's a heavy snowfall, should you clean off the outside of the jugs?
I don't think, I've never done that actually. It depends on how heavy the snowfall is, but I've seen pictures of people who have, 3 or 4 inches of snow on top of their winter sowing jugs and containers. And I don't think it's necessary actually. So, I mean, it can't hurt, but it also can't hinder as well.
And we have a comment. Nikki Jabor out east has a few books as well, which is true. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, very helpful, those books.
Yes.
And Andrea, who's the Director of Sustainable Environments at Halton Environmental Network, has said, let us hope everyone has success. She loves the puns.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Kirsten.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Kristen. I'm going to start tag team on what you've been talking about in terms of vegetables and talk about native plants and how we can winter sow those plants, which is the natural way that they grow. So we're basically just cooperating with how they've been designed to have a dormancy period and then get stimulated by cold temperatures to germinate eventually. So I'm going to get my slideshow up. Okay, here we go. You all see that all right? Okay. On the left of this slide, you see back in the spring of 2020, I became acquainted with Blooming Boulevards and Jeannie McWright and Wayne and their mission to populate the city with native plants for pollination, for beauty, for species diversity, and a number of other reasons. So we cooperated with them to grow a lot of plants for their plant sale at the meeting house in the raised beds that you see on the right in the winter, so that we normally grow food for food banks, but in this situation, we thought, well, what a great way to use the beds for a stratification place for these plants. So we used cups instead of open cups instead of closed containers for winter sowing. So I want to talk a little bit about what our experience was in doing this the first year and how you might be able to do this in your own context. So native plants are really well adapted for winter sowing. With a little bit of TLC, these young native plant seedlings, especially in the cotyledon or seed leaf stage, are very adaptable and hardy to withstand transplanting movement and various outdoor conditions. All I got to do is act naturally is what they do, and they do it best. So in these cups, these cups were, this is what looks like probably in late March. You can see pearly everlasting little seedlings in the bottom of this cup. The cotyledonary leaves are out to the side and they're just starting the true leaves in the middle. This is white yarrow and this is dotted mint. So even when, especially when they're this small, that's the time we want to do some transplanting. So, but that takes a number of months of cold stratification in order to achieve. So the requirements for seed germination are variable. There are germination codes that have been assigned by people to try to help us understand what their requirements are. So A is seed that will germinate within 4 weeks if sown at 20 degrees Celsius. So some seeds don't require a winter dormancy or cold breaking of that dormancy. So hyssops, sunflowers, primroses are some examples of that. The B category are those which need to be shifted to 20 degrees and then back to 5. In other words, there needs to be a cold period for at least 30 to 60 days for them to be able to break dormancy and germinate. And if we don't give them that, you'll just have seeds that are going to sit there and not germinate, because it's to their adaptive advantage not to germinate too early because the cold and harsh conditions aren't favorable for them. So it keeps them dormant until the temperature is up enough that they can be successful. There are some that germinate back and forth cycles of cold and hot. There are some that need moist stratification followed by cold stratification, and they'll germinate. There are some that have chemical inhibitors in the seeds that need to be leached out over a period of time. There are some that require light to germinate, as Kirsten was saying. So lettuce, the milkweeds, and beard tongues would be examples of those that require light. So they have to be sown right on the surface so that light can penetrate and stimulate that. There's some that require scarification, which means scratching the impermeable seed coat so that water can get in, so that any chemical inhibitors can come out. And so if there's some kind of a capsule around the seed, like there are in some of the legumes, like showy tick trefoil or bush clovers, that can be scratched off, and then the seed can be exposed. So there are some good sources on this that I put in the chat right early in Kirsten's presentation that give you some charts that you can figure out, okay, these are the plants that I want in my native garden. Which ones have what requirements and how do I put them in the same type of either winter sowing jugs, much like what Kirsten was explaining, or the method that I'm going to be talking about in a moment. So I want to talk about another method of winter sowing, which is stratifying and germinating seeds in flat, shallow, open outdoor containers or cups, and then transplanting them into larger pots or cups to grow them out to a size that's substantial. or they can be used in the plant sale or used in parks or places where you want to renaturalize or where there have been invasives, such as garlic mustard, that you have taken out and you want to put in some substantial size and give them a head start over the competition. Or you can grow them further outdoors in cold frames or hoop houses to achieve this. Okay. Another method of winter sowing then is using, repurposing flats and containers that are for food or for meat or whatever, tofu, and sowing them, packing them with soil, and then sowing the seeds on these. We used open cups in the first year. This time I'm trying to use repurpose these containers as opposed to buying cups, and allowing them to germinate in those kind of conditions. So you can see out in my front lawn, which is a garden, all of these flats that are laid out during the winter. And these are the containers, open containers that had food in them before. So we can transplant them after they have germinated, which would be in March or April, into these pots, which would be filled with soil and have adequate holes on the bottom, as Kirsten explained. And if you get them at the very early stage, the transplant shock is minimal, and it's much easier to tease them apart and to transplant each of these little creatures into their own environment to give them plenty of space to grow and give them a good head start on the growing season. So successful transplanting, if you look on the right-hand side here, this is an evening primrose in the seedling stage that was in one of the pots that we had the first year. And it's amazing how, whoops, go back here. It's amazing how extensive the root system is already, even though there are only 2 little cotyledonary leaves there. So the energy that was stored in that seed is phenomenal and has really helped this little creature get a good head start. So that's the stage at which we want to transplant them, so that it's easy on them and it's easy on us to do it. So the timing, when the cotyledon seed leaves are small, before the true leaves appear, fill the cups, and without pinching the stems or damaging the roots or allowing desiccation, just tease them apart gently. And what we did is we had a tray with water and a rock in the middle of it. And we could lay the seedlings out along the rock, leaving their roots dangling in the water so that there was no dehydration. And then we would create the right size hole with our finger or whatever, popsicle stick, whatever we wanted to use, and then gently lower it into the hole and tamp it in, and backfill with any soil, making sure that the soil line here, right at the base of the plant, is the same as it is in the cup. You don't want to bury them up too far, up to here, or leave them exposed down to there, right about at the soil line. And then water them again. And then what we did is we arranged them in trays, the typical ones that you would find at any kind of garden center or nursery. And that's a great place to get used trays that you can move things around as opposed to taking 1 cup at a time. We arrange them there for ease of movement and for spacing them out as well. So these are the cold frames that I found a way of just using simple materials. So this is, let's see, okay. Here you can see the pipes that we use is a plain 1/2-inch water pipe, and we joined them together, cutting them in hoops first. So 5 hoops per greenhouse or hoop house, and then joining them with wire at the various junctions so that they would remain stable. And it was simple materials like 2x4s that we could get easily. We used pretty well all scrap lumber from pallets and everything to make these. So the total cost for it was about $60 per frame. So in taking the 2x4s, running the length of it and the width of it, we would screw on another piece of wood to act as an anchor for the rebar that was cut into 1 foot lengths to insert into the holes, and then insert the hollow pipe onto that as a stability. And then we use plastic to roll up onto long 1x2s to form the membrane over top of the hoop house. And then we brought all of our trays out into these, and we rolled them up so that it was open during good weather. If it was too windy, we would shut it. If it was too cold, we would shut it. If it was at night when the rabbits were coming for a meal, we would shut it. Otherwise, it was just left open. And nature took its course and did a great job in maturing these. So the hoop houses were great for regulating temperature and accelerating growth. So on a cloudy day, more light would get in and act like a greenhouse to stimulate further growth. It was a natural hardening off process. The maximum amount of light was available when the plastic membrane was rolled up, and it kept out the critters at night when it was rolled back out again and secured at both ends. So steps again, just to review what Kirsten already shared. We need a good grow mix, a lightweight one. We use ProMix BX with mycorrhizae in it, which is a definite benefit to the uptake of nutrients. Coarse sand for reducing the splash out while allowing light penetration for those with the code of H that need light to germinate. We washed the plastic food trays and had at least 1 inch deep of soil in them with water drainage holes, and great with perforated lids or to use a protective screen over top of them. So those ones you saw in my front yard, I'm going to move them to my to the deck that we have and cover them with screen during the time when the plants are actually up. And you need good labels and markers, ones that won't wear off. Collect or buy the seed. There are a number of places like the North American Native Plant Society has a plant sale or a seed sale, a seed exchange. There are lots of sites where you can get seed or go and collect it yourself. But there are certain protocols for collecting seed out in nature so that enough is saved for it to continue to propagate as opposed to us taking too much. So there are get good seed, and if you need to scarify them, take off the hulls, research that and do that with just simple medium grit sandpaper. Don't do it too much or you'll pulverize the seed, just enough to scratch the surface or to remove the coating. And some seeds would benefit from a 10-minute pre-soak in hydrogen peroxide to kill off any fungi that might be pathogenic to it or inhibit its growth. And then fill and label the trays to the brim, and then compress it and label it well so there's no confusion. You'll learn to recognize the seedlings or seeds eventually anyway. So then sow the seeds, spreading them evenly across the flat. Well spaced to avoid clumping. Like the compositae family, the asters and the daisies, etc. They tend to clump together. So you have to remove the chaff from that and spread it out, and then drizzle it across the soil surface so that it's well distributed. Cover them with soil proportionate to the depth of the seed. Only the light requirements with coarse sand. And then soak from below. That's what we typically did, was soak from below and then just mist from the top to make sure they were good and wet. And then move them to the overwintering location. It should be level, shaded, or at least monitored if it's a sunny location, so it can be rehydrated if it starts to dry out. And it should be outdoors for at least 60 days of near freezing temperature, or at least fluctuating to freezing and then thawing and freezing and thawing. And then for maintenance, to protect them from pelting rain so the seeds aren't splashed out, I'm putting window screen over top to deaden the force of the rain. But otherwise, that's one of the benefits of having them enclosed in one of the containers that Kirsten described, was that you don't have to worry about that kind of dislocation. So these are some of the hoop houses. They're simple and cheap to build. We had large volumes of plants. You probably won't need something this size if you're just doing it for your own garden, but if you're doing it for the parkland or land in the area that's been, you want to reintroduce native species instead of the invasives, then you will probably need to cooperate and work with a number of people and do it together as a team. So these hoop houses are great in terms of they just took up space on my driveway, and the warmth of the driveway also facilitated quicker growth of the plants. So you want to maintain the temperature in the cold frame so that it doesn't roast the plants. So we had the ends of the cold frames open during the day typically, or we just took it right back off, rolled up the plastic and then rolled it back at night if we needed to, or if the conditions were extreme. And I just weighted it down with rocks or whatever on the side. And these are the end pieces of 2x4 where the plastic, which is up draping over top of the whole hoop house, was brought down, wrapped around this, and wrapped up and snuggled in for the night. So there's a downloadable construction plan on in the chat that you can have a look at on the Blooming Boulevard's website. You will need to be careful about watering. Wow, when the plants get large, sometimes we were watering twice a day under these conditions before they were used in the plant sale in June for Blooming Boulevards, or before we planted them out ourselves. They will need to be fertilized. There are various ones that you can use, or covered if they are frost sensitive, or enclosed if the bunnies are around. This is our Blooming Boulevard garden that was started in July of 2020. So some of those plants went into the future of this garden. So it looks pretty uneventful at this time, although the woodland sunflowers were definitely blooming at that time. But this year, or last year, it was definitely much more populated with foliage and with bloom. In the front, you see the wild columbine. And it's just been a wonderful way of beautifying the neighborhood and showing neighbors this, and hopefully some neighbors will pick up the cause and we'll have a corridor of pollination in the city. So why do we do this? For native and floral and faunal diversity, for a native pollinator network, for natural beauty, for food sources for all the creatures, and for stewardship with the Creator and how those were designed. So I just want to show you one more picture. And I'm going to have to stop share here and go and pull it up. This is the, can you see this at all now?
No.
Okay.
No.
Let me go back and
I think you need to share screen again.
Share screen. There we go. Okay. Got it. Okay. This is bone set out in our front garden. And I'm going to just run this for a minute and look at the activity of the pollinators. Wasps, bees, flies, beetles, skippers, butterflies. It's phenomenal how diverse they are and how attractive they are to this. Look at the petunias and other plants nearby. There's nothing happening. So the beauty of having native plants is that the native creatures love them. There's just a commensal relationship they have with each other. And so it's just a delight to be able to foster that kind of thing in the city environment. So thanks for listening. And I hope that you can purchase or find some seed, or that you become involved with Blooming Boulevards, or maybe even wherever you live, to try to repurpose some of the land that we just mow grass on for bringing the wild back into the city. Thanks.
Thanks very much to Kirsten and to Rick. That was an amazing presentation. If anybody has any questions, just put them in the chat. I'm also going to repeat that the Oakville Horticultural Society is giving away a free family membership. It'll be a draw, so if you are interested, just private message me. My name is Helen, Halton Food. Just send me a private message and you'll be entered in that draw. So somebody wanted to know, actually, the picture you showed just before the video of the bone set, they want to know if that was a Canada lily or a Michigan lily.
It's a Michigan lily. Yeah, it's in our front garden, and it's just a stunning specimen. Yeah, I have to be careful with the little red beetles that were introduced from Asia that feed on lilies. That's one thing I have. I mean, there are some introduced or invasives that will cause problems with the native species. So there are little things that you'll become aware of.
And somebody just had a little problem with the link that had the hoop house cold frame construction.
Okay.
We will get those links from Rick and then post them on our website, the Halton Garden Week website, which I will just copy and paste that. And
you can also go just directly to bloomingboulevards.org and you'll find it on their website.
Okay, perfect. Okay. All right, is there any other questions for Rick or Kirsten? Yes, got a couple. Can you suggest a native that blooms in red and has red foliage to help celebrate the year of the garden? Oh, that's true. This 2022 is the year of the garden. So.
Yeah. Well, the foliage isn't necessarily red, but cardinal flower is a stunning plant and likes a relatively moist soil. So if you have that type of soil situation, that would be a wonderful plant to, it needs full sun as well. So it's a wonderful specimen to have. And yeah, that would be one that I'd highly recommend.
And are there any plants that rabbits don't like? And I'm with the person who's asking this question, because I can start so many natives and then, yeah, they're gone.
Yeah. I have, there are some plants that for sure they will not go after. The milkweeds for sure they won't touch, as won't a number of other species because of the toxins in them. Even if the rabbits do get our plants, what they usually typically do is chew off the outer foliage and don't get the growing point. So it's almost like a way of pruning the plant and stimulating side buds to break and to bush out the plant, so to speak, and cause it to proliferate in another way. So the rabbits aren't all bad, but to try to protect the plants when you're putting them out, I did put a chicken wire fence around my boulevard for a few days until Jeannie calmly told me, Rick, you're not supposed to have any barriers in there. Yeah, okay. Then what I did is erected little ones around the bush clover, for example. They were really any kind of legume, like you see them eating clovers normally in the environment. They will just go crazy on. So I just had to put, like a little tomato cage and then some chicken wire around that. And that got the bush clover going through the year and it survived.
Yeah, I do the same thing with some of the newly planted native plants in my garden too. A little chicken wire fence, put it around. I even used an old dog collar, when they have surgery, although it created a bit of a greenhouse. But yeah, because they have new ones that are plastic. But yeah, any kind of barrier just for the first season until it can get established usually helps.
Rabbits usually don't like plants that are very hirsute or prickly. So for example, Pearly Everlasting is one of those furry type of plants. They don't eat that. Some of the other, they definitely will eat asters. They chewed our asters right down to the ground. But they're doing fine. they recovered. And typically the rabbits are dying for green foliage early in the season, which is when I'm putting out these plants. So, but later on in the season, they're off feeding on other things. They don't bother it. So, you know, they're part of the natural environment.
Sure. All right. If there are no other questions, I will, well, I've done the draw because I did as I always tell people. So what I've done is the order that you give me your name. I give it a number and then I do the random number generator on my phone and I come up with a winner. And today's winner for the Oakville Horticultural Society family membership is Sophia Gast. I think I'm pronouncing the last name wrong, right? Sophia G. So if you can contact me, I'll put my email in here and I will connect you with the Oakville Horticultural Society. And that's right. Yeah, she realizes she's the winner. So good. Congratulations. That's awesome. And still to come at 2 p.m. we have climate change and food systems. And at 4 p.m. we have a cooking class, making nutrient dense meals. So thank you so much again, Kirsten and Rick. It's been a pleasure to have you and sharing your information on winter sowing for both vegetables and perennials. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Helen.
you.
And thank you to everybody for joining us this afternoon. We hope to see you again in about half an hour. Thanks, everybody.